Good morning and welcome to the Envestnet Institute on Campus's Women in Wealth Management's quarterly webinar guest speaker series. For your reference, all lines have been placed into a listen-only mode to prevent background noise. If you would like to submit a question, please type it into the Q&A console located on your GoToWebinar screen at any time during the presentation. We will attempt to answer as many of your questions as possible during this time, and we will have a Q&A portion at the end as well. All questions and answers will show up anonymously. If you have any technical difficulties, please email envestnet.platform@envestnet.com for assistance. Additionally, we will be recording today's event and expect to make it available shortly after the session. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our guest speaker, Robin Pollock of Trellis Consulting. Robin is a business strategist with an expertise in diversity and inclusion. Through her company, Trellis Consulting, LLC, she helps organizations launch and utilize diversity and inclusion initiatives more strategically and effectively to create inclusive, equitable cultures. She brings years of experience working with companies as a business attorney and has lectured and written extensively on issues relating to business practices, diversity and inclusion, implicit bias leadership, and optimizing organizational structures. She is a member of many professional associations such as the Forum of Executive Women, the Philadelphia Society of People and Strategy, the Society for Human Resource Management, and she sits on the board of NAWBO Philadelphia Center for Advancing Entrepreneurs, and on the Females in Finance Advisory Board. In addition, she is an adjunct professor at Temple University's Beasley School of Law, where she teaches negotiation and drafting, and is a leader on our own Envestnet Institute on Campus's Women in Wealth Management leadership team. Robin is a woman of influence and a leader to be recognized. We are very privileged to have her presenting today on today's quarterly webinar guest speaker series, speaking on building your brand and positioning yourself for long-term success. Please welcome Robin Pollock.
Wow, thank you so much. That was quite an introduction. I had to stop and think, who is it you're talking about? So thank you. Very, very nice. I'm really excited to be here. We're talking about building our brand, so we have a lot to talk about. I want to let you know that this is going to be an engaging webinar. So when I typically teach these kinds of sessions, a lot of times they're live, so we have great conversations and we're able to really engage. So I would love to be able to replicate that here today so that we get to know each other a little bit. We can share some things about ourselves. It is anonymous, so nobody knows who you are, although I'm a little lonely up here. So if anybody would like to turn their webcam on, I would love to see you. I understand that sometimes people don't feel comfortable doing that, but if you'd like to join me and turn your webcam on, that would be awesome. So we are going to start today about talking about building your brand. Hold on, I'm getting a message that you guys can't hear me. Is that any better? I'm not sure what is going on. My sound is on. Hold on, just give me a second. I just want to make sure that you guys are able to hear. Just give me a second here. Not sure. Nope. Can you hear me now? I just want to make sure you can hear. Hold on. Apologize for this. I love these technical difficulties.
Robin, we can hear you now. We can hear you now.
Sorry about that, everybody. I'm not sure what's going on. As long as you can hear me. Okay, so not sure where it cut off, but just to reiterate, would love for you guys to be as participatory as possible and engage in this discussion so we can share, so we can get to know each other a little bit, which is really part of building your brand. So to start off with a little bit of interactivity, I would like for you guys to type in to your chat or questions, however you're communicating, one word that you would use to describe yourself. We're going to be talking about how to build your brand, and so much of it is personal and who you are, that I want you to think about one word that you would use to describe yourself. And let's start sharing them. I can read them out so that we can all see what we think, how we would describe ourselves. So I'll give you guys a second to start typing that in and have that sent to me. We're not going to know who's saying what, but I'd like to hear from you how you describe yourselves today, right now, one word. So are you organized? Are you an extrovert? Are you sympathetic? What is it that you would, one word? Are you driven? Are you powerful? Reliable. Awesome. Powerful. Anybody else? Passionate. You're going to get out of this what you put in, so really think about it. Resourceful. Organized. Intuitive. Oh, that's awesome. I love that one. Very cool. Intuitive. Anybody else? All right. These are awesome words. And this is where you start. This is where you start thinking about how you think of yourself. So what exactly is your brand and how do you build it? You know, we've all heard the term. There's a lot of buzz around building your brand. It's sort of a buzzword, but do we know what it really means? What is it that we're actually doing when we say we're building our brand? So let's first think about it in terms of how companies do it. You see some companies up there, you immediately have an idea in your head of what those companies stand for and what they mean. So let's take Nike, for example. You see the swoosh up there. Nike's brand is just do it. That swoosh is very recognizable. It's really the epitome of sports. That's what you think about when you think of Nike's brand. And that swoosh is really a universal symbol. It defines athleticism, it's courage, it's honor, it's victory, it's teamwork. It's all those things that you think about from a branding perspective when you think about sports. It's what they stand for, it's their values, it's their image, it's how they want people that are out there, the consumers buying their products, to think of them. So the same is true for when you're building your personal brand, or if you have a smaller company like I do, how do I build my company's brand? What does it stand for? So we've got a tagline, and we're going to talk about personal taglines a little bit later. But the tagline, one of the taglines for Trellis is, we maximize people and profitability. So in that tagline, we're communicating what we do, who we are, what we stand for, what value that we bring. It's our mission, it's what's important to us. So again, building your personal brand is no different. Okay, so keep that in mind. Before we go into how to actually build your brand, because we're going to give you the tools to do that, and you're actually going to get, or you've already gotten a worksheet that will sort of walk you through the steps and things to think about as you're working to put your brand together. And keep in mind that you're not building your brand in a minute or a day or a week or a month, right? It's a process over time. So we're starting that process today, but it's not something that happens overnight. Nobody knew who Nike was when they first became Nike. Nobody knew who, you know, Starbucks was or Coke. It takes time to build any brand. So I want you to keep that in mind, that we're starting the process, but it's a work in process. So before we get into how we're going to do it, let's talk about why it's important. Why does it even matter? Why do you care if you have a brand? What does it mean to have a brand? What's the whole big deal? What do you need it for? So if you can turn to the next slide, we'll start walking through why have a brand. So the most important thing about having a brand and creating a brand is because you want to be in control and manage your own reputation. You don't want other people creating or looking at you or talking about you in a way that is not consistent with how you yourself want to be seen. I think we might need to switch to the next slide, guys, just to make sure we're all on the same. Oh, thank you. So people are going to look you up on Google. People are going to look you up on LinkedIn, and they're going to create an image of you, both professionally and personally, over time based on those interactions. And again, this is what you want to be in control of. You want to be in control of how people see you. So you can choose to create your own brand and guide it and cultivate it yourself, or you can let somebody else define it for you, which is not what you want to do. So that's why it's so important to have a brand. So it's really about defining who you are, determining how you want other people to see you, and then creating that authentic business image from there. We're going to talk about the authenticity piece in a second. So I actually think of creating your own brand as sort of like your reputation plus. It's really about your reputation with a little extra oomph to it, a little mystery or a little creativity around how people see you. Okay, a little bit more deliberate, a little bit more calculated than just a reputation, but it's very much based on your reputation. It's also very much about the value that you are bringing to the people that you're trying to reach. And we'll talk about that as well in a little bit. So all of these things are going to tie together, and you'll be able to utilize them and sort of spiral up as we go through this session today. And by the way, if you've got questions about anything that we're talking about as we're going through, please feel free to put them in the chat. We don't have to wait till the end. I don't want you to forget a question or think it's off topic if you wait. We're going to be very conversational here as much as possible on a webinar. So please feel free just to type in your questions. I will get them, and not a problem to stop and answer them for you. Okay. All right. So there are two really, really important components to building your brand. And I really want to talk about these in a little bit of detail because I know a lot of you are on the Envestnet Institute on Campus program. You may be college students or you may be younger in your career. So I really want to talk about these two components, authenticity and professionalism, because they're so, so important, particularly professionalism, as you move through your career. So what is authenticity? I think we can go to the next slide too. So when you're creating your brand, you're not creating some alter ego here. Are you guys able to, perfect. You want to keep it real. You see that right there. You want to keep it real. A brand is not something that's different from who you are as a person. A brand is about you. And if you're not authentic in building this brand and creating this brand, people won't buy into it, and it's not going to have the impact that you want it to have. So the more real and authentic your brand is, the more it's going to resonate and really stick with people, and they will remember you. I mean, and that's part of building a brand. Think about how you remember Nike and Starbucks and Hershey. Very recognizable, very memorable, and that's really your goal when you are building your own personal brand. So it's really about how you connect with, how you touch other people, and if you don't seem real, if it sort of seems put on or fake, that connection is going to be missing. And again, you're not going to be able to get the benefits from building the brand that you're looking to do. So the other piece of that is that if you're not authentic, people aren't going to trust you. Building a brand and business development and all the things that go into being a successful person in the workplace are built so heavily on trust. So authenticity is a huge, huge component of trust. So you want to be honest and you want to be real as we walk through the process of how to build your brand. And you want to think about your passions, what makes you unique, what makes you you, What is your vision? These are all the things that go into who you are, and those are the things that you want to communicate when you are building your brand. What are the things that make you stand out? What are the things that are going to make people remember you? What's different about you, your experiences, your background, your viewpoint? And again, even if you're new out in the workplace, you still have lived a life. You still have experiences. You come from different backgrounds. You've done different things. You know, maybe you've traveled the world. Maybe you come from another, country. Maybe you had some unique experience that, somebody else in the wealth management or financial services space wouldn't have. So think about what makes you unique, and what's going to make you stand out. And that's what you're going to use to really write your own individual story. Your brand is your story. It's about who you are. So you really have to dig deep and think about who that person is and what that person, brings to the table. So building a brand is really about a little self-exploration. First, understanding your true self, and then figuring out, how am I going to get that out there? How am I going to share that? How am I going to disseminate? So if you can't get to that part where you know who you are and what's different about you and what makes you you, you can't get to the next step, which is sharing that with the world. So I think part of the brand for me, part of my brand, is the passion that I have for what I'm doing. I'm really trying to help companies. I'm really trying to change the landscape. When it comes to diversity and inclusion, I'm really trying to make things better for workplaces and for diverse people in the workplace. So that is, part of who I am and what makes me me. So that's obviously incorporated, into my personal brand, which is of course tied up into my company. So why don't we do a little bit of engagement here and share, again, in your chat, typing in something that you think could be part of your brand that's unique to you. As we start thinking about this authenticity piece, tell me some things that you think are unique to you that you could see potentially incorporating into your brand. We'll give you guys a second. So what makes you you that you would want to communicate? Okay, somebody said they love to teach, learning new skills, making a difference, good listener. Great. We'll give you guys another minute or so here. Who else wants to join in? What is it that you could incorporate that makes you unique, that's going to set you apart, that's going to make somebody remember you, but that's very real and true to who you are as a person? Understanding differing opinions. So being able to maybe stand in the center of a situation and look all directions and understand where different people are coming from. Okay, have another one more? Anybody? Compassionate. Okay, these are awesome. So think about all of these amazing traits that you just shared and how that's going to fit in when you start creating that communication to the outside world. So if you're compassionate, that's something that you're going to want to incorporate into your brand and how you create that. You're going to want people to get that feeling and know that about you in all your communications and all your interactions, how you go out into the world. Okay. All right, so let's go to the next slide, which is about professionalism. And I cannot stress this to you guys enough, how important this is, whether you're just starting in your career, whether you've been in a career. I teach at law school, and I tell my students, like, this is it. This is the most important component to creating, how people look at you, because your reputation is everything. So hold on, I'm going to talk about professionalism, and then we have a question, and I'll answer the question in a second. So professionalism is everything. Your reputation is everything. Once your reputation is sort of gone, um, there's not a whole lot you can do to get it back, unfortunately. So you really, really have to be careful how you go out into the world. So we said a brand is very much like a reputation sort of on steroids, your reputation plus. But at the core of things, how do you want colleagues and people that you work with to think of you? And that starts with your basic reputation and your basic professionalism. How do you interact with people? How do you treat people? How prepared are you? Do you go into a meeting and just sort of expect that, somebody else is going to take over, or you're not really prepared? That goes to how respectful you are of the people that you're working with. How do you communicate? How do you talk to people? What kind of tone do you use? Everybody says that, to remember that when you start a job, or, when you're in the working world, that, even the person who is, looked at as the lowest level on the totem pole is just as important. You have to treat that person with the same respect that you would treat the CEO. So think about how you're interacting with people. How do you present yourself? And I know I don't talk a lot about how you dress and what you look like, but people out in the workforce want to see that you're presenting yourself professionally, and that you care, and that you're not wearing your Saturday night outfit to the office. And I hate having to have those conversations, especially with women, but that's the reality of the workplace. So look at your professionalism in general, to make sure that you're your best, most authentic, most professional, most upstanding version of yourself when you're out in the workplace. All right, so somebody asked about what steps or ways can somebody make themselves stand out when looking for a job, especially when they're, you're basically putting your resume into an online platform like a Glassdoor or an Indeed. Is it as simple as making your resume look different? I think first of all, if it's possible, putting your resume into the sort of Glassdoor or Indeed abyss is really, really hard. I actually recommend that if there is a job that you're interested in, that you utilize LinkedIn and utilize your network to see if you know somebody there. So that's a little bit of a different answer to that question, but that's where I would always start. Do I know somebody at this organization that can help me get in? Because especially with these online resume platforms, it becomes like everybody just submits their resume whether they're qualified or not. It becomes even harder for HR people to sort of cull through who it is they actually want to interview. So if you do know somebody, I always start there. If you don't, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply. I've actually seen some really interesting resume formats. It used to be that resumes, were on that sort of same format, and if they didn't follow that, people sort of looked down on people for not, maybe not being professional. But I think that resumes that are actually formatted a little bit differently, a little bit more interestingly, actually are ones that catch people's attention. So you can think about how to integrate your brand and communicate who you are in your resume with the way that you actually create it and the formatting that you use. And I think that, the words that you use, especially in a cover letter, it's really a place for you to shine. So there are certain resources that are out online that tell you sort of how to get people's attention in a cover letter, how to have an opening that's not, a regurgitation of your resume. So think about that communication as a way to integrate your brand. So hopefully that answered the question. We have another question. In regards to professionalism, what advice could you give to those that maybe find themselves in a difficult office situation with either a coworker or another work peer? What is a good protocol to follow, or a standard? I would say that there are always going to be difficult people in the workplace. And your goal is to control yourself. You're not going to be able to control if somebody else is acting inappropriately or acting, not professionally. And I am not talking about abusive or harassment or sexual harassment situations. That is a whole different level. And that goes immediately to HR or a supervisor or a manager. So I'm not talking about those situations that are actually actionable from a legal perspective. I'm talking about, maybe somebody who's just not professional, maybe somebody who's not holding up their end of a project, that kind of thing. So again, you can only control yourself, but I would certainly have a conversation with the person in a non-threatening, sort of non-judgmental way, and just, depending on what's happening, like let's just say you're on a project and they're not holding up their end, have a conversation. You maintain your professionalism and you maintain, being true to who you are, and do your best to diffuse the situation and deal with it. Again, if it gets to a situation where it's abusive, or you're really having a problem where the person is doing no work, or whatever the situation is, or it's just difficult to deal with, you can certainly always go to somebody in HR. But I always think having a conversation with that person initially, in a sort of calm way, is always the best way to handle it. Because a lot of times people don't realize that they are creating an issue. Maybe it's a personality conflict. I actually have a client right now that's having some conflict issues at their staff level. And they're fighting and they blame each other and they have all kinds of issues. And it's actually a result of a lot of confusion coming down to them from the leadership level. So sometimes things are going on that create difficult situations between coworkers that are really not those coworkers' faults. And so that can also be an issue, which is why I think if you can go to somebody and have an amicable conversation, maybe it's over lunch, maybe say, hey, you know what, let's go grab a cup of coffee and sort of discuss what's going on, that you can figure out a way to work through it. But again, you can only control yourself. And if it is a situation that's dangerous, you need to tell somebody. One more question and then we'll move on. Do you have any suggestions about how to read a room and adjust to the environment to uphold professionalism? I'm not sure I completely understand what that question is asking. I guess, you sort of come in, or maybe you're asking about if it's a little bit more of a relaxed environment, how do you handle that? It's interesting. These kinds of questions come up a lot with people that are traveling, people that are at conferences or at offsites or are with colleagues in not an office setting. So maybe that's what the question is asking, if the situation is changing. Again, you can be human, you can be at a conference and certainly have a drink with somebody. That doesn't mean you're being unprofessional, but you always want to sort of keep your wits about you and recognize that whatever you're doing that's work related, it is still work related. It is still how you would operate in an office setting, with supervisors or managers or, higher level people. So whatever the room is or whatever the environment is, again, if you're at a conference or you're at an offsite and, it's a cocktail party, by all means, you can certainly have a drink. But I have seen people get out of control at professional events and it becomes very unprofessional. So you don't want to be, drunk. And I have seen this happen. You don't want to be, dancing on the tables. I have seen that happen. You see all kinds of crazy things. So you want to remember that whatever the situation is, if it is a work situation, it is still work. So hopefully that answered the question. Okay. All right. So next slide, please. This is so, so important. Part of professionalism and overall branding and anything that you're doing in the workplace is to be excellent at whatever you do at any stage of your career, particularly when you're starting, but at any stage of your career. The most important thing is, as to how people view you and how they see you, is to be the best at what it is that you do. So if you're a wealth planner, if you're an accountant, if you're a financial manager, whatever it is that you're doing, the most important thing is to be excellent, because if you're not good at what you do, everything else about your brand is just fluff. And believe me, people see through fluff. If there's no substance underneath, that fluff only lasts so long. So you can be an awesome brander, an awesome marketer, an awesome communicator, but if you're not really bringing the goods, people know that, and that will get out there, and there goes your reputation. So one of the things that you want to do is really to start positioning yourself as an expert. And I know that sounds hard for people that are just starting. Who's going to listen to me? Who's going to think that I'm an expert? But that doesn't mean that you don't start setting those things in place from the very beginning so that you can be viewed that way later. So maybe you're an expert in one really small component of, financial analysis. You're really, really good at it, and you did a whole project on it in college, and you had an internship, and one sliver of financial analysis, like that's your thing. That's fine. That's great. That's fine to be an expert in that one piece as you start, and you build on that as you go. So it's really the very most important first step to positioning yourself for long-term success. That's how you earn respect. It's how you build a reputation, and it's how you build your brand. And without first being excellent and being looked at as an expert at whatever small thing it may be, you're never going to really rise up the pipeline. You're never going to develop professionally. You're not going to be able to develop business if you're not excellent at what you do, because people, again, that trust factor comes in. People don't want to work with or give business to people if they're not excellent at what they do. So really, really important. Whatever skill you've got, or whatever skill you're honing, whatever position you're in, be awesome and be excellent at it. So somebody had a question: how do you get people to listen to you or even see you as an expert in a particular aspect? We're going to talk a little bit about how you actually create a brand and build a brand. And that goes to that, how somebody can see you as an expert. So we'll talk a little bit about writing, about speaking, about blogging, about different ways to get out there with an expertise. So I did not start out as a diversity and inclusion expert. I was an attorney for 20 years, and I had to sort of change my brand out in the world, how people saw me. So I researched and I read and I spoke and I wrote, and over time you build that expertise and people start looking at you as a thought leader and as an expert. So it takes time, but you can start with one small thing. And look, if you are, let's go back to that example of you are an expert in one vertical of financial analysis. People will know that, and people in your company, your organization will come to you when they have those issues. You become the go-to person. So another example to answer that question, when I was a restructuring lawyer, I was a bankruptcy lawyer. And someone in my firm in the environmental department had an issue that was at the intersection of bankruptcy law and environmental law. And nobody in my group really knew anything about that. And someone said to me, hey, do you want to take this? I didn't know anything about it. I certainly was not an expert. But by the time I was done working with my colleagues on that very first case, I was an expert on bankruptcy law and environmental law, where they intersected. And every time those environmental lawyers had a problem, related to a bankruptcy, they came to me. So you teach yourself, you learn. People will start looking at you that way when you're knowledgeable about a certain area. Okay, so that's how to start building that. All right, so how to actually configure your brand. We know that authenticity and professionalism and excellence are the keys to start putting that together. Those are the foundation. But how do you actually do it? What are some of the things that you should be thinking about when you're creating your professional self? So let's go to the next slide. So you want to start thinking about what you do and what you are known for. What do you want people to think of when they hear your name? What's those one or two things that come to people's minds when they hear your name? So that's one of the things, the first thing you need to think about when creating your brand. Okay, so for me, I want people to automatically think diversity and inclusion. But more than that, I want them to think of me as a thought leader and as an expert and somebody who's really out there substantively trying to drive change and give practical solutions. So that whole concept of who I want people to, how I want people to think of me needs to be incorporated into my brand. So I say that I'm a diversity and inclusion strategist and an educator. So we're going to talk a little bit at the end, very briefly, about creating a tagline for ourselves. But my tagline may be something like, I'm Robin Pollock. I'm a passionate diversity and inclusion strategist and educator, and I help people climb, achieve, lead, and thrive so their organizations can. So think about, what is it that you do? What are you known for? What is that unique sort of personal part of what you bring? Okay. So, and just as an aside, I don't know if you guys have heard of elevator speeches or elevator pitches. An elevator speech is really how you sell yourself or position yourself to somebody in an elevator ride. So very, very quick, 30-second, when someone says, what do you do at a cocktail party, you want to be able to spit out what that 30-second elevator speech is. The tagline is really the start of that. So very short, punchy, not a 30-second thing, but something that gives the same sort of information, okay? And you can also, you can even put your tagline in your signature line on your email. I've seen a lot of people do that, so that that message constantly gets reinforced whenever you're emailing somebody. All right. Next thing you want to think about is, what are your values? What's important to you? What guides you in your professional life? Is it honesty? Is it helping other people? Is it selflessness? This part of what is important to you and who your values, what your values are is really important to how you want the world to see you and what's important. Okay. What are your passions? What is it that you like to do that's going to make you, not just another financial analyst, but something that really is unique and that screams you, and that when people hear your name, they think of something very, very specific. So what makes you different? One of the things that you'll see on the worksheet, and I actually want you guys to do the worksheet. I mean, it's there to give you a guide and for you to start doing this hard work. You can listen to me talk about how to create your brand for an hour, but unless you're actually going to start walking through these steps, it's sort of a little bit meaningless. So think about your passions, what you like, what you enjoy, and then think about how you can integrate them into what you do. So when I started practicing law, I started a women's networking group in an international professional organization that I was in. So did a lot of work with gender diversity and women and networking, and that over the years actually became part of my brand. People, yes, knew me as a restructuring lawyer, but they also knew me as somebody who was very committed and passionate to women's issues. So think about what you're passionate about and how that integrates. What are the traits that you want to embody? What are your personal attributes? So we said in the beginning of this webinar, think of one word that you could use to describe yourself. The next step in that process is to ask other people for one word that they would use to describe you. So think about 5 people, 5 colleagues or people that you know that you could potentially ask that question to. And then look to see if those words are congruent with how you view yourself. Are you resourceful? Are you reliable? Are you empathetic? Are you forward thinking? If it's not what you expected, think about why it's not congruent. Think about how those words may be so different from how you view yourself and the brand that you're trying to convey. And you may need to realign things if people are not seeing you the way you see yourself and the way that you want to be seen. There are a bunch of surveys online that you guys can just Google to actually do your own personal brand assessment. So that may be that may be something that you want to think about. What are your strengths? What are your skills? What are you good at? What do people seem to recognize you for out in the world? Are you a good writer? Are you a good leader? Are you a great strategic problem solver? Think about the strengths that you have and write those down as you're creating your brand. This all is what goes into creating your brand. These are all the elements that you want to think about. And then think about some more business issues. Who is it that you're trying to reach with this brand? Because you're not just out there in the world sort of, free falling. You're obviously doing this for a certain purpose, whether it's to, connect with people or develop business or move your career to the next level. So who is it that you're trying to reach? Think about your target audience, just like a consumer. Nike thinks about who their target audience is and how are you going to utilize your brand to connect with them? What is going to resonate most with them as you're putting this brand together? What weaknesses do you see? What things do you see in what you're bringing to the table that may be construed, as a weakness? And how do you counteract those and present them more favorably? This is almost like a SWOT analysis, looking at your strengths and your weaknesses. And then the last piece is the competition. We talked about a brand being your unique you. So how do you want to differentiate yourself? What do you do better? What do you do differently? So there are lots of people out there that do diversity and inclusion consulting. And two of the things that differentiate me is that I come from a business background versus an HR background. Very, very different. So I understand how these initiatives can impact the bottom line. I can talk to C-suite executives in a different way than an HR person. And the other piece is that I'm an experienced educator. I've been teaching for 17 years. So when I'm doing sessions and I'm doing trainings or we're rolling out initiatives, I have an experience level that not everybody in this space has. So think about what separates you and differentiates you in your field. So somebody asked a question, what ways can you keep yourself relevant as you continue to brand yourself and fall into a specific position? I think your brand is something, we're going to talk about being consistent with your brand, but there's got to be some flexibility within that overall consistency. So as things shift, you have to be able to shift. So when I first started Trellis several years ago, it was a company that focused just on gender diversity. So all of our branding was around gender and pink and women and all of that. And as I moved through, building my business, I recognized that that gender diversity wasn't broad enough. The companies were looking for more diversity in general, and I decided that I needed to broaden the focus and add the business component to it, because that's my strength. We're a business strategy firm now, whereas when I first started, we were really a programming platform. So I think you have to look at the marketplace. I think you have to look at what's going on in the world, what it is you're trying to accomplish, and be able to be a little bit agile if things are shifting. Or if you find that you're becoming irrelevant, how do you sort of shift that? And what's interesting is that Trellis had a brand at this point. We have a logo, people were recognizing it. I didn't want to lose that, making this shift from women focused to more business strategy and diversity in general. So we actually took our logo, which was very like shades of pink and didn't have anything that really suggested beyond women. And we took that same logo and we changed the colors to have all different colors. You'll see the logo at the end. It's a trellis, like a ladder. But you'll see the outside is all different colors to represent diversity and diversity of thought. So think about how things are changing, how you need to be a little agile. So we maintain the consistency, which is important, of a recognizable brand, but shifted it to become more relevant. Okay. All right. So the next slide is talking about how to use this branding message for maximum impact. How is it that you're going to get the word out about who you are? So we've talked about what's important. We've talked about some of the steps and the things to actually work through to build your brand. So once you have it, what do you do? How do you get it out there? Because if it's just your brand and nobody knows, it's really not going to be effective. So before you do anything that's sort of a mass dissemination where you're going out on social media or using constant contact to blast an email, whatever it is you're doing, do some testing. Pilot your tagline, pilot your strategy, test it out with people that you trust. Try to get some feedback on what they think. Do they think it's effective? Do they think it makes sense? Do they think it's congruent with who you are? Do they think it communicates what it is that you want to communicate? So test it out. Okay. There are a lot of ways to begin to build your brand publicly. We talked about using it as part of an email signature, one way to, constantly send that messaging. And certainly social media is a huge way. People communicate on social media constantly, and that brand is very much a part of it. Even if you are in college or you're just starting, what do your social media profiles say, particularly LinkedIn? I know a lot of younger people sort of, LinkedIn is sort of not the same as, Instagram or Snapchat, but working people in the business world are on LinkedIn. You need a LinkedIn profile, and you need to think about how you're positioning yourself, what your LinkedIn profile looks like, and what it says, okay? Again, be really careful where your target audience lives. There's a lot of sort of scuttlebutt with people posting things that are too personal and not business enough, oriented enough on LinkedIn. Facebook, and I know a lot of the, millennials and Gen Z aren't using Facebook, but Snapchat, Instagram, those things are a little bit less professional than LinkedIn. So think about what you're posting and who the audience is on those platforms. You can write articles, you can blog, you can post articles, you can comment on articles. All of these things help you build your brand. So if somebody posts a diversity article, I may comment, and everything I always say is consistent with who we are and what Trellis stands for. That it's about business strategy. It's not about throwing things against the wall. It's not about checking the box. How do you create meaningful change? Everything we say goes to that messaging. So when you're commenting, when you're posting, you always want to tie it back to what it is that you're trying to communicate and what you want people to, to think of about you and your brand. So again, you want to be consistent on social media, and when you're, interacting with people, it's a really important component. Again, looking at what it is you want to say and how does that support and bolster your brand. Just really quickly, do people here use social media for business? Anybody? Okay. One person. Okay. So somebody wrote sometimes when they're comfortable. And actually, like social media, using LinkedIn, great. I mean, it's actually easy because it's it's not anonymous. Your name is there, but you can think about what you want to say and respond in a way, you can take your time. So think about utilizing that as a tool to get your messaging across. So how else can you get your message out? How else can you provide value when you're out in the world? So we talked about posting articles or commenting on articles. Writing your own articles is another great way to get your brand out there. Also a great way to position yourself as an expert. So maybe your organization has an internal newsletter or a blog, or there's a place internally to share information. If you're in any professional organizations, a lot of times those organizations have newsletters that go out, even if they're electronic. Offer to write a short article. Again, you're getting your name out there, you're getting your brand out there, you're positioning yourself as an expert. And of course, if you can get published in any actual publication, that's even better, because that's really going to position yourself as an expert and get you out there. And look, it might take longer if you are just starting, but certainly you can contribute to websites. Websites and places to blog are always looking for content. So it doesn't have to be that you're published in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. It doesn't have to be that level. Just start getting yourself out there. And you can even blog on your own, or post your own articles on LinkedIn. There's a function where you can publish your own article on LinkedIn. You don't need anybody to say it's fine. You can just go and do it. And so you become an author, you become an expert, and it's a great way to get your message out, without having to worry about, an editor or some other, component to that, okay? So writing is going to enhance your credibility and build those strengths. I actually have a friend whose son wanted to work for Major League Baseball. He graduated college and he was actually a financial analyst. I think he might have been at Deloitte or KPMG, and he didn't want to do that. He wanted to do statistical analysis for Major League Baseball. And he actually started a blog about Major League Baseball and, statistical analysis and how it, the whole thing, how it fit together. Went to graduate school, used this blog sort of as a springboard for getting his name out there. And now he actually has a job, I think, for the Minnesota Twins, actually doing what he wants to do, this statistical analysis for a baseball team. So you never know where it can go. All right. So the idea with writing, social media, create your content and get it out there. Certainly networking and one-on-one interactions are a great way to communicate who you are. We talked about, sort of your tagline and your elevator speech. Somebody asked a question about sort of what to do if you're an introvert, how to do this kind of thing, when you're, not comfortable or you're not great at cocktail parties. And certainly one-on-one interactions at those kinds of events and things are a great way for somebody that's not as outgoing to start communicating who they are and building their brand on a one-on-one situation. I'd heard a story of a guy, again, somebody very introverted, met up at a conference with somebody else who was very introverted. I think one of them was a lawyer and one of them eventually owned a company or was CEO of a company. And they met when they were young. Both of them didn't like to talk at cocktail parties, didn't like to really interact with people, but they met. They had one-on-one interactions. They saw each other years and years and years, became friends. And the lawyer, that businessman became that lawyer's biggest client. So it doesn't have to always be somebody out there screaming, here I am, who, you can build your brand in a one-on-one situation, particularly if you are introverted. Okay. Another thing you can do, which is sort of interesting, is to create your own events. So you don't have to wait for something to happen. You can create your own events. And this is something that you can do early in your career. And it's really a great way to integrate your passion with your work and have it all rolled up into part of the, into the brand of how people see you. So I have a friend, her passion is wine. And she's actually at an engineering firm, but she's got this passion for wine and she became a sommelier. And she actually started hosting, wine tasting events for her clients. And it actually became part of her brand that she was into wine and that she was a wine expert. And people started looking forward to going to these events because they were fun and it was a way to network. And so people knew her not just as an engineer, but also as this wine expert. And she married those two passions and it really became something successful and something that sets her apart. She's the only, engineer out there that's also a sommelier. So think about those kinds of passions being integrated into what you do. All right, next slide, and we're winding down here. When communicating your brand, be consistent and clear. We talked about this a little bit earlier. You want people to get your brand and who you are easily. You don't want them to have to think about it too hard. You don't want them to have to wonder or be, unsure what it is that you're trying to say. So you want to say the same thing and you want your content to be congruent and you want to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. I think there's a statistic in advertising that says, you have to hear the same message somewhere between 7 and 21 times for it to actually resonate with you, with the person. So think about that. Think about being consistent and being clear. Again, it doesn't mean that you can't change. I talked to you about how I changed, my brand for Trellis. But once I changed and once I, picked a lane, it's very, very consistent and it's very, very clear in everything we put out there, every interaction. So you've got to be aware and be flexible that you may need to change things or you may need to tweak or adjust. But your overall messaging, once you've done that, has to be consistent and it has to be clear. Remember the example of me taking my existing logo and keeping the framework of it and changing the color to create a communication of a little bit of a different message, but still that basic communication was consistent, okay? All right, so next slide, just some things to recap, to think about. What is your vision and your passion? What are your values? What's important and what matters to you? What makes you different? What are you known for and what do you want people to know you for? What are the traits you want people to associate with you? Think about your strengths, think about your value. That's all wrapped up into your brand and what you want people to think of and how you want people to see you. Remember, this is about creating your reputation and creating how other people view you, as opposed to letting them dictate, how the world sees you. Think about who you're trying to reach and connect with. What's important to them to know about you. That's really, really, all of these things go into creating your brand. Again, doesn't happen overnight. You don't have to create this thing in 5 minutes. It takes some thought and it takes some, really thinking through in a consistent way and a deliberate way how you want to be seen in the world. All right, and then I think we have one last slide. We talked about your tagline. So just some little tips to help you get started with creating a tagline. So think about who you are and what you do. Think about why you do it. Think about a problem that you solve and what makes you different. So you see there, I started one that tells people, I help millennial women maximize their money so they can rule the world. So it tells people, what that person does, why they do it, they're solving a problem, and what makes them different. And it's a little bit catchy. It's a little bit punchy. It's going to be a conversation starter. Certainly, if you're verbally saying it to somebody, they're going to want to ask you, oh, how, women rule the world. That'll be a whole other conversation. So you really want to think about your tagline being really simple, like this example, and encapsulating these components so that you're communicating, the right message. All right, so any final questions? I think we have a question slide. We can take a question or two if anybody has it. Anybody? I know we answered some questions throughout, but if anybody has last minute questions, happy to answer them. Okay, everybody good? Okay, so if you flip to the last slide, this is how you can reach me. So if you have a question that you think of later, feel free to reach out. If you have any questions when you're filling out your branding sheet or you're starting to work on these things on your own, feel free to email me, and I'm happy to help walk you through any of this. And I think that's it. Unless anybody has any final questions, I thank you for having me. And again, feel free to reach out for any help.